Your job sucks, so you spend nights and weekends hacking on this sweet side project. You dream of quitting your job and striking it out on your own, no boss but yourself. Well, there's right and wrong ways to do this, and just to mix it up, we're going to talk about what not to do as you contemplate this journey. Recorded in front of a live Twitch audience, this is Dev Matters. And welcome. Today I have a guest that has already been on the show, Dylan. He's my co-founder at Twitch and has been around for a long
Sleuth.
time, side projects and whatnot. So welcome, Dylan.
Hello. Hi, Dev Matters audience again. It's great to be back.
Oh, I got to do. Okay, good. So let's get started about side projects. So Twitch, or Sleuth, is a side project that you started many years ago and put it into. But before we get into that story, let's talk a little bit about what kind of side projects work well and which ones don't. Like, what makes a good side project worthy of a startup in your mind?
That's a great question. I think that like anything, right? Like any product, it needs to have broad appeal. So side projects are often these things that you're like, oh, it'd be amazing if, and you can do something and it might fit like a little niche. But I think that's like very different than like what kind of broad appeal would this have? I mean, the difference between a toy that works well for you and three friends and something that you can go out and actually sell to people and turn around and like productize, that's pretty darn different.
Yeah, that's true. I think what makes a side project so fun is that it's something that you really want to do. And one of the biggest mistakes of side projects is thinking, well, if I'm so excited about it and I think this is the best thing ever, surely everybody else is. And they
Oh
would give
yeah,
me money for this thing. But
yeah.
that is such a massive leap.
It's an insanely massive leap. Even when you have something that you think has broad appeal, I think when you go out to the market and you ask the market whether it has broad appeal or not, you might be pretty surprised that there's like a different take on that. But I think a lot of the side projects, at least that I've seen, are I mean, you have a ton, right? Like we could probably just roll through a list of the ones that you have that are amazing for the things that you want to do. I mean, the code generator stuff that you've made videos with before, that's super cool. And you need that because you're tired of doing it yourself or you want to have that in the video. But like, would you make a startup around that? Like, I don't know how much of a need there is for that, right? So it's really, there's a difference between that excitement level and the passion about like just making something go and like productizing.
Yeah, that's a good point. The one that I always think about, and I've done this as well, is the game and the game engine, where
Yeah.
how it generally starts is you're like, oh, I've always wanted to have this game. Like I'm gonna make my own. Like for me, it was Heroes of Might and Magic. I love that game. I thought the game was so much fun, and if I could make my own, that would be amazing. And I think there'd be people that would want to play it. And then you start down that process of making a game and quickly realize this is a hell of a lot of work. And the problem with side projects is you're doing in the middle. It's not like you take off work for 6 months and gonna go build it. And generally when you build a game, you have a whole team of people, graphics people, engine people, design people. So you're trying to do all of it yourself in your spare time. And in typical programmer fashion, you start building a engine so that you can put in the content
Mhm.
later because you don't want to hard code it. You want it to be super flexible and whatnot. And then as you go down that path, you start thinking, well, you know what, this game is a hell of a lot of work. What if we instead just made a game engine and I put
Mhm.
that out there and then maybe someone else will find it and they'll build games. And so you get into that and start building all the docs. Except, of course, you never build that game on top of the game engine. You're just trying to
Mhm.
get this engine out there that no one cares about it and doesn't work. Now, and I say all that to say it sounds like, oh, you shouldn't even start from the beginning. I think that's one of the best things about side projects is trying new things and learning new technologies and playing with stuff.
Mhm.
But I think you also do need to recognize that it's cool for you for very specific, in my case, nostalgia reasons. Almost guaranteed it's not that interesting to anybody else.
All software leads to frameworks, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I think the distinction that you're talking about, which uh, I always like encourage like young developers for this too, is the cool thing about computers is that like it's the ability to make them do the thing that you want to do, right? And so like side projects are cool in that way because you like can learn a little bit about some like language that you don't get to work on at work or that your university doesn't think is cool, or like, input output because you never do those sorts of things. And so like that's a great opportunity for you to learn, but like don't think that every one of those things is going to be like a product or something that like should be a startup, and I think that's a very big distinction there. And
Yep.
of course there's always like the anti-pattern examples of like somebody, what, Zuckerberg started Facebook as a side project, and then like look at that, it's Facebook, and you're like, yeah, I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I think that's actually probably another great point is you hear a story about someone who took a side project. Gmail was a side project from a Google engineer and da 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 da
Right.
da. Now it's the number one mail client and the way that everyone gets their information. Or what was another one that was, anyways, things like that. And you're like, oh, well, clearly it can work. You're like, so
Mm-hmm.
therefore mine works. But that's kind of like looking at a lottery winner saying, if I pick numbers, I make
Exactly.
money because it did
Right.
work that one time.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. um yeah.
Yeah. So what would you kind of say to someone who has a side project and they're like, which type of side, is this a good thing to do for a startup? What would you say to that person? What kind of guidelines would you give them?
Whew, that's a good question. So, I mean, again, I think it's about broad appeal. Like, can you articulate past yourself and a couple of like interested users uh, who might want to buy this thing? Like, is it a hard idea to think like who would want to purchase such a thing? Um, is there a market for this? Like, is there an existing market for this? Are you doing anything different than that existing market? Is it a differentiator that people are willing to pay for? Um, you know, are you having to create a whole new market? Then just you got to ask some hard questions like, why does that market not exist? I mean, it's totally reasonable that you're creating a new thing, but what's been done out there? There's just a lot of things. I mean, these are all the things that we sort of run into and have asked questions about with Sleuth as well. I mean, that's like a great example of something that started as a can I, and then turned into a yeah. Like, would anybody else wanna? And like, does this thing have legs? Does it not have legs? Is it a answer to a missing piece of the market, or is it just like an oddity? Like, and these are hard things to really understand. There's a bunch of tools out there though, or paradigms that can let you test things out. There's like that strategy of like create your marketing page, create that one page thing, sit down and do the exercise of like, if I wasn't encumbered by the existing code base, how would I talk about this thing? Send some Google ads, pay for some Google ads that send traffic that way, and see if people are interested in signing up. Um, there's a lot of different things you can do to ask yourself, but there's a danger. And I mean, we probably all know this as engineers, which is I've already got the code, it already works. So now all I have to do is fill in the marketing message, right? And
Yeah.
that's it can work, but it's a little scary.
Yeah, I think the key part of what you just said there is I just have to. As soon as you ever say anything like I just have to, everything else is all in a row. We got all the things in place. We're executing.
Yeah,
I just need this one thing. No, you're deluding yourself. That should just be a red flag immediately. Because I think
yeah.
that's probably one of the other points I'd want to make on the side projects to a startup is that when you're thinking about a side project, you kind of have this fantasy that if I just do this one thing, there's this one moment where it turns from this to that and it all blows up.
Mm,
But
yeah.
in practice, that's not how it works.
No, I mean, that's so rare, right? Like, I mean, Pokemon Go is like the one that I always use as an example. That blew up, but then again, it had like 20 years of Pokemon behind it, right? And like mobile phones had already blown up, and it was an AR game which had already blown up, and there was a lot of things that meant that thing was just going to work. Um,
And it was built on another AR game that was very
exactly.
successful and had a huge following. And so they got all the technology out. And I think that's probably the other thing. It's easy to look on YouTube or look on these new startups and think like, oh, someone just sat down on a weekend and coded this thing and put it up there and it blew up. And every now and then, yes, there are cases like that, but the vast, vast majority, you would look at the background of that person and you would see failure after failure after failure to
Mm,
get to this point where, hey, now I kind of have something that's useful.
gosh, and it's even worse than that in the sense that some of these things have like a flash, and then the question is, do they have staying power? You know, like people are like, oh my god, that'd be an amazingly cool thing. I think that'd be like great, and they get a ton of downloads. But then the question is, like, did they convert to sale? Like, you know what I mean? Like, did it have longevity? Like, was that like, is there a real like there? Um,
Hey, check.
it's all complicated.
Oh, damn it. You didn't see it, but there was a sweet video we got of you in
Oh God,
2009. Isn't
wait,
that
I do
great?
see it. No, it's behind. Oh my God. Yeah, this is me at Atlassian Summit or something like that, doing like a Jira talk.
Yep.
Oh man.
Yeah, we had
Yeah.
fun. We
Okay.
had fun researching the B-roll for this video. Yes, there's the generic stock photos for sure, but we got some Dylan shit. It's great.
Right. Yeah. I'm not the pretty blonde looking at the computer, sadly or confusedly though. That
Just
wasn't
looking
me.
for that one thing that would make it successful.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right.
All right. Well, you mentioned it several times, and I think it's probably starting to get into. And just to kind of give some context, why we even had this conversation when I was talking to Dylan, I was like, "Oh, I was thinking about talking side projects and how you turn them into products." And your reaction was, "Oh, I can tell you how not to do that." And I was like, "Well, there's my damn topic. That's awesome." So let's talk a little bit about Sleuth because I want to hear not just the story, but I want to know what about it. What are some of the mistakes you made, things that you totally could have done better? But before
Mm,
we do that, let's have a word from our sponsors.
okay.
Do you want to ship code more frequently? Are deployment stressful events that you avoid? Well, Sleuth can help, and let me show you how. Sleuth is deployment mission control for shipping continuously. It helps developers coordinate and track the health and progress of deploys so that they have the trust they need to ship code faster. Modernizing a dev team is a tall order, but one that pays off in both productivity and developer happiness. Sleuth might be just what you need to pull it off. And we're back. Good news, we're going to be recording a new commercial this weekend, which I'm really excited about. The tentative title is Anti-Spy. So Daniel and I are going to be running around in the office doing all these little gimbal moves and special effects. It's going to be very entertaining for us. So at least we'll have some content, I guess is what I'm saying to mix it up here. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Sleuth, because Sleuth was your side project. And this is something that I wanted to surprise you with. I haven't told you this is going to happen. So let's see if this works right. Well, I guess I should have started it better. But Sleuth started actually as Deploy Hub.
That's
And
true.
yep. And so what you're seeing is the Deploy Hub's
Oh
website circa
man.
January 11, 2016, I believe.
Yeah. That was
Yeah.
all my terrible CSS encoding. That's true.
And to be clear, Sleuth, you didn't turn it into a startup until, what would you say? Well,
2019.
yeah, 2019. Oh, 2020. 2020 is when you first got the funding, right? At the end of
Yep.
2019. So this
Yep.
is years before.
Years. And I had some customers actually. I had a paying customer right at a certain point, I think in 2016. Launch Darkly decided to pay me $30. I think I took one payment from them, and then circumstances had it such that I had to like boot existing customers off and shelve it for a little while. I was, pretty sad about it, but still, it made its way back. Launch Dark, they made their way back to us as well. So
Right. Because
everything's
this is one
right.
of my favorite parts down here in the pricing. You had like a package for everybody,
I sure
all the
did.
packages.
Oh my gosh.
Whoever you
Yeah.
are, I got you. I got a
You
package
know how
just
much
for
of a
you.
pain in the ass it was to put together pricing though? Like that's the thing about like turning your side project into a startup. Holy crap, like you have to support like inviting users and like access levels and then paying for things and sending invoices and emails, all of which have like absolutely nothing to do with the value that you're trying to add. Like, and if you want to like launch it and have people actually like take you seriously, these are kind of things that you have to have. Um, oh, yeah.
I did find another little nugget down here at the bottom.
Oh,
I found this fascinating. On premise. Oh, you
oh
can't
yeah.
see it because of oh yeah, you can see it.
No, I remember.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's not just cloud.
No.
You were gonna to ship software and support an on-premise product. I like the
Well,
ambition.
I was no. You know what I was? So I had like I was like sneakily like moving it, like, bringing it into the places that I was working. And so like I'd done this little stint at Cloudflare, and they're very concerned with on-prem stuff. And so like we were tracking this data. I was using it to track data for a team that I had there that was like a pretty shitty team that we were trying to turn things around. So I was like, and I had people asking me for these like summaries of like what we had been up to. And so I was like, I've built software for this, so I'm just going to use it. And I was like, oh yeah, we could do on-prem. Like that doesn't seem too hard. It's all in Docker, so we can just like Docker this thing up. And yeah, luckily was disabused of that notion pretty quickly.
So from the beginning, this side project was meant to be a product. I mean, clearly you had a website with pricing plans and all kinds of stuff.
No, no, honestly. So like, okay, here it goes. Like a little tiny bit of origin story time. I had been the eng lead for Bitbucket. I'd been at Atlassian for dog years. As Bitbucket grew and grew, it was source code hosting, and like we were the Jira company, and so we had all these issues, and like people were asking me for like, hey, what are you shipping? Like I like my direct managers and people further up in the company, and I couldn't answer it. And I was like, this is stupid. Like, we're doing all these deploys and I can't even tell them like what we're shipping, and I can't keep up with pull requests anymore. And I'm like, so I had this like thought that like, why not orient everything around the deploy? Like that seems like that makes a lot more sense. We're in this SaaS world, and so then when I left Atlassian, I was like, man, this should be easy to build, right? Like famous last words for a side project. And also like I had been a manager for years, so I was like, I better roll up my sleeves and see if I can code anymore. Um, and so just started whipping this thing together, and it was much more about like, oh god, there's another one. Yeah, that's an MK first website. Um, but it was much more about like, is this possible and would it be interesting initially for me, and I was just like, oh, can I write an nginx config, or can I just ask others to write nginx configs, and so initially, and I had a little time off in between jobs, and so I was just like, something to keep me busy and something to sort of like be interesting. um, and then kind of kept building it. Decided like, nah, I don't want to do a startup. Like I just want to go off and get another job. And I don't know who I would start this thing with, and I'm not even really sure about this thing right
So
now.
when was
Anyway,
this exactly? Just to help me kind of put the timeline. So you had this idea from your day job that like this would be cool. So you built it.
yes,
And you weren't thinking like I'm going to quit my job and make $1 million selling it at this point, or were you?
no, no, not
This
at
this
all.
is
In fact, I
2015, right?
yeah, 2014, 2015, something like that. I
Okay.
left the job, and I was like, okay, what am I going to do with myself? I know. And my family and I decided to take some time off. We were going to travel around South America. And I was like, oh, well, I'll take a little laptop with me and code a little bit. I didn't really code much at all on that trip. And then when we got back, I was like looking for a job, and I was like, but also like I wanted to stay busy. And so I was like working more and more on this thing. And I guess like one of the cool signs about a side project that is possibly something that's useful is I kept getting more excited about it. Like I'd work on it a little more and it would start to come together, and I'd like, I think deploy frequency and deploy size were like the first things where I was like, oh my God, wait, it's like a dashboard thing. Like I had like a list view of things, and then I was like, wait, the stats of like how these things are going out. And I was like, oh, that feels right. I'm like, ooh, I like this.
So that's actually a
Uh,
really interesting point there. So when you had that startup, you're saying one of the keys to knowing that you should keep going is something you get more and more excited. And I think what you're kind of implying there, but I want to make it explicit, is that when you're doing a side project, it takes so much energy because it's stuff that you're doing outside of your job, outside of your family, outside of all this stuff. And usually people don't have a ton of time just sitting around. And
yeah,
so you need a lot of motivation to keep going and pushing on it. And so when you're
that's true.
excited, that gets the motivation. You can't just think, I'm going to make $1 million, because generally speaking, maybe for some people it is, but generally speaking, that's not the motivation that you need. You need to be passionate about the project and be passionate about the thing. Is that your experience?
Absolutely. And honestly, like that, it's a little well, let me just tell the story, I guess, because there's like a danger zone there, right? So like what happened with me is I was really excited about this thing. I actually probably convinced myself to be more excited about it than I was about the jobs that I was interviewing for. But I'd also decided like, I'm not ready to go get a like do a startup just yet. And so But like, I was working at Cloudflare for a short amount of time, and I was like still working on Sleuth because it was frankly a lot more exciting than Cloudflare at the time, um, and then I transitioned to someplace that was more exciting at Status Page, and we were using Deploy Hub at the time, and I was trying to launch this thing, and like that's the crazy making time was like I would have like you fight to get somebody to come and look at this thing and give it a shake and try it, right? And I would have somebody like show up and do something and run into a bug. So I see like an error come in, and I'm at work in the middle of the day and doing a job that's like a full job, and like your instinct with this thing, because it's your baby, is you want to like fix that thing right away because somebody had a bad experience, but you're in the middle of your work. And so then what you tell yourself is like, oh, okay, well, I guess when I go home tonight, after we've made dinner and cleaned up and put the kids to bed and whatever, at 8 o'clock, I'm going to sit down and like fix this bug and hope that I can get that person to come back. And oh man, that's exhausting. Like it's really, I don't know. I don't think that's the way to do your side project per se. Like it can drive you. I've seen other people do a similar thing where they were like, making 100K, a month or whatever on this side project thing. But again, like they just like, it meant they had to like do this crazy trade-off between real work and this other thing. And you end up shortchanging everybody.
Uh, Daniel asked an interesting question. What was it that made you feel you were not ready for a startup? Sixth Sense?
Hmm. Yeah. That's a very personal thing, honestly. I think it's about like, are you ready for the risk that comes there? Like, are you in a good place, like emotionally? For me, like a big part of it was like I didn't really want to be a solo co-founder or founder,
Yep.
and I just it's it's all about like timing, like everything in life, right? And I think it's a matter of like who in your life is available to do a similar thing at the same time as you. And at the time where I guess I had thought about this thing, um, I didn't have people that I necessarily knew that would jump on that, and frankly, I wasn't convinced. I think that's probably the real answer there is like I wasn't convinced there was a market for this thing. I wasn't convinced that it would that others would find that broad appeal. It was cool to me. I wasn't entirely sure it was cool to others, not to the extent that I was willing to go out there and try it at that time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so being convinced in your own mind was one of the keys, you think, if you're going to do it. And I think the other point you made is an interesting one. Side projects, almost by definition, tend to be solo things. It's things that, like, oh, on the
Mm,
weekend, I'm going to hack and I'm going to build. But you're saying to go to that startup where it's a lot more work and the finances and all that stuff, you don't have to, but it's way easier if you have people to work with. And actually, you could almost argue
absolutely.
that that should be one of your key steps right there. If you can convince someone else to work on it, then there might be gold in them their hills, so to speak. Like kind
Yeah,
of what you were saying is you weren't convinced, but once you have other people that you respect and are super awesome like myself join, well, then clearly it's a great idea,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. And the other thing too is like I think it was like I was going through a process at that time, right? Like being like, do I love this thing or do I not love this thing? And then I had an interesting thing happen, which was like the Atlassian acquisition of Status Page, and like I was going to go back into Atlassian with that acquisition process, and they had deemed the Deploy Hub project as like competitive. So watch out, Atlassian, we're coming for you. Uh, but yeah, no, we'll just edit that straight out in post.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll
Um,
fix it in
yeah,
post.
yeah. But anyway, what it meant was that basically I had to put this thing on ice for a little while. That was that time when like we had a customer and then we had to like tell the customer to go away, and that was probably really good for me in the sense that I was like, oh, okay, well then I guess I don't have any like there's nothing I can do about this. I just have to wait. And um, it just never went away. It was something that I would continue to be excited about as the industry evolved too. Right? There was like more where I was like, oh shit, you know what? Like right there's a trend that like falls right into this thing. Like this was in the wheelhouse of what's going to be happening and what is happening right now. Like I would have these like shower moments like across like a couple of years where I would like start to think about it again, or I'd have a conversation with somebody about it. And that would be like the times when I was most animated. And I'd be like, oh my God, yes, because deployments and this and that and whatever. And you could do these things and you could do those things. Or I'd be like having a shower moment and I'd like think of like an amazing feature that you could do or something. And I'd be like, that would be when I'd get really excited. And so, like having that time, I like to say that like I gave this thing plenty of opportunities to die on the vine, like
Right.
all of them.
So that's a really good point, and that kind of gets to the section that I want to talk about, which is kind of the lessons learned. And you were saying that almost the mistakes that you made by taking a really long time, gaps off, not sure you're really committed, almost helped you in the end, because
Mm,
if the idea and the passion survives all of that, then you're onto something. Whereas if it was
yeah,
something you get excited about a weekend, which is 90% of my projects, I get excited a weekend and then I forget about it, and it just goes away. Um, Sometimes taking that gap, and I guess the whole thing is if you love it, let it go, and it comes back to you. So your
right.
passion for the side project turned startup. You let it go several times, and it came
I
back to you.
did. Yeah, there were a couple of times there where I was like, that's never going to be a thing. And I still have these moments, and I've said them to you, where like, we add some feature and some thing into Sleuth, which was like long ago thought up thing. And like, I have to like take a double take and I'm like, fuck yeah, man, this exists. I'm like, I wasn't sure that was ever going to exist, but there it is right there. Like, and it works, and I'm like, that's great. Um, but like on the time thing, it really, in my instance, in Sleuth's instance, like it was really good things, right? Like because I think the market caught up to like the Dora metrics and like frequency of deploys. It just became very mainstream, and like it was obvious that there was more market here than there was, say, like 4 or 5 years ago. Because it's about catching the wave at the crest, not like, or at the right time, not at the wrong time. I mean, you and Michael, like I don't. If I had tried this thing 2 years prior, you guys were busy doing other things. You weren't in the right place in your lives to sort of jump into this exciting thing. And I wouldn't want to be doing this with other co-founders. Um, and so yeah, there's just a lot of things that I think have to align to get it right. And again, I guess we're skipping the whole part about like, should we even be doing this thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's about like finding some customers, some early customers that are going to be your champions, and finding people that believe in this vision and are willing to go on the journey for you, like, or with you.
Yeah, no, this is definitely a massive topic, and we'll probably find ways to discuss it again. I just want to point out something that you didn't say. I never
Okay.
heard you when you're talking about mistakes. You never talked about tech stack. You never talked about language. You never talked about, some library that you should have used or anything like that. You're all talking
Hmm.
about motivation. You're talking about the human element. You're talking about passion, working with people. Those are the things that you're talking about, both mistakes and good things.
Yeah. No, that's right. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's the dev manager side of me or something, but I mean, what is it? Slack is written in PHP from like circa like 2001, some framework, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, like they're worth a gajillion bajillion dollars, right? Like they made it work. Like they built the tooling to make that thing not suck, right? And somehow they even found PHP developers. Like that stuff is all surmountable. I feel like. I mean, I do hate that social auth framework that we use, and that, and you hate it now too. So like, to go back and like fix one little thing, that probably be one of them. Um, yeah, but it's much more of these other things, and I mean, as you've learned too, like in our whatever year and a little bit of startup, product market fit, like, is this the right thing? Like, do people want it? Is the market like gonna pull this, like pull for this thing? And like, can you like clearly articulate the pains and the other things? Like, one thing I wish I was always better at is just the words side of it. I can like show you a long demo and maybe get you excited, but can I like say it in 3 sentences,
Right.
and nail those pains? Like, oh, it's so hard.
Yep. Yep.
All
That
these
makes sense.
Yeah.
Before we go into questions, what would you say? I'm going to throw you right on the spot and say 3 mistakes you made in Sleuth that you would do differently. Specifically, one that's for other people that are thinking about maybe taking their side project and making a little bit of money. What would you say from your experience, from your learnings? You're like, here's 3 things that you should learn from me from.
Oh gosh, 3 things that you should. Oh man, you're putting me too much on the spot.
This is part of the fun of this whole thing. Actually, to be honest, I invented this whole TV show and this whole thing just so that I can put you on the spot and grill you. This
You don't
is
need help.
so
Come on now.
satisfying in the
Yeah.
end.
Man.
Or some things. Doesn't have to be 3.
Yeah. I guess you know one of them is probably. Oh, man, I don't even know how I feel about this one. You just want as much feedback as you can possibly get from real world people, and that can be a hard thing depending on what you're trying to sell. So the more real world customers or people or just even friends that you can have that are using it that are willing to talk to you, the better. And I think there's probably to do it again. Like there was a couple month period where we didn't talk to people that much, and instead we're pursuing the sort of the vision as sort of preconceived. And 2 months in startup time is dog years. It's a really long time, and so that's something that you definitely don't want to do. Let's see. Um, Other things that I wish we had done that we didn't do or that we should have done.
And B-roll is us talking on the same
Oh,
show.
that's a little
like-
strange.
like
That's super bad. Oh God, I'm wearing basically the same outfit.
Hey, but I want to point out that shirt, I'm wearing red today. My wife looked at my
I'm wearing
videos
a
and she's
different
like,
undershirt too, so that's
right.
a thing.
Yeah, my wife looked at my videos and she said that, I need to get you a new wardrobe. You're wearing the same thing every time. So I
No,
mixed it
that's
up just for
sporting.
her.
That's sporting for Sleuth. Like it's like Sleuth swag. Um,
I want
let's
to
see.
add
Well,
one.
let me reverse that question onto you, co-founder,
Okay.
CTO of Sleuth. What 3 things would you say, like having this Sleuth experience underneath your belt? Would you?
I'm not
wish
going to
you
say
could
3 because you didn't say 3, but I will say 1.
know? Okay.
And that is when you're thinking about if you have a side project and you're thinking like, I might make this a startup. One of the biggest mistakes I think that you can make is go to people and say, hey, would it be cool if this happened? And they would usually go, yeah, that would be awesome. And you might think you're clever and say, would you pay money for this? And they'd say, oh, yeah, I'd pay $50 a month for this or, whatever. And then you walk away from that thinking, hey, I found something. This is going to be awesome. And what you're forgetting is that those people you're talking to are probably your friends. And even if not, they're strangers and they're trying to be nice. And that's really not a good indication of interest. What instead you should be doing if you do have someone to ask is ask, like, let's say we do deployment tracking to help people deploy faster. Instead, say, when's the last time you deployed software? And tell me about it. What's the hardest part of this? Why is it the hardest part? How do you work around that? Because what you're looking for when you're trying to figure out if this is worth a startup is you're trying to find an idea that is a pain point for real people that they have found a workaround for, but it's not great, and they're willing to pay money for it. You need all of those keys to know if you're actually going to be solving something, because you can find something that people are annoyed, but if they won't pay money, it's no good. Or you could find something people don't really have a pain. They're like, yeah, that's kind of cool, but then they're not going to be motivated to pay for it. So that's probably the thing that I've learned the most.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally right. And I mean, even to take it a bit further, you can find people who are willing to pay you money for it and still don't have the engagement that you'd like to see, like that you need in order to sort of propel yourself into the stratosphere. And that's probably another thing that I've learned, right? Is like just because somebody's bought into your vision and is willing to pay you for a thing and using it and like adopting it, like doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be super repeatable, right? Like you might be getting signal in some area, but like you're missing signal in other, and like it's dramatically more complicated than it would seem. What do we say to ourselves like all the time? We're like, well, if it was super easy, everybody'd be doing it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
but
that's
it's good fun. I mean, I guess that's the like to put the positive spin on it. Like, and you haven't asked this question, but I'll answer it anyway. Like, am I happy to have like turned this side project into a startup? Absolutely.
Hmm.
Like I got to a point where I was like, this thing is fucking with me, and like if I don't try it, like I'm gonna hate myself. So like I'm just like gonna figure out a way to like whatever, pay for myself for a year. And I was just like, really, I was like, look, if I end up doing this by myself, if it's just me sitting in a basement coding for a year or whatever, and it doesn't work, like I don't care. Like I have to try this thing, and I'll try this thing, and then then I'll know. Because I'm tired of like asking myself the question of like, would it, wouldn't it? I don't know. I'm like, I want to find out, and I'm willing to back myself and run the experiment. You know?
I think that that's a really good point to kind of leave with. Is sometimes it's just about just doing it. You can research the hell out of it. You can create the best business plan and listen to all the top 10 tips all over the place and think that you're doing them all. There's just no substitute for just doing it. You can't
Oh
read about a
man,
bike all the time and say, well, I know all about bikes, therefore I can ride a
yeah,
bike. You can't until you actually do it. So I think there's something about even if you like, this is a bad idea, this is going to be too hard, doing it anyways. There's value in there.
yeah. You know what else I found, which was like awesome and lovely, and I mean, I guess I'm a little like fortunate that this was the case, but like once I had determination, other people's reaction to it was very different. So like I had sort of talked to potential co-founders and folks and whatever, and when I was saying like I think maybe, right, like they were like I guess I don't know, but when I was like, oh, I quit my job and my last day is on this day, and like this is this thing I'm doing, suddenly like the people in my life that did have interest were like, okay, hey, we need to have a conversation. Like we need to have a conversation like nowish. And like we were very fortunate in the sense that like funding found us for our seed. But again, like the world, like once you start doing the thing, I think the world is ready to take you more seriously. Whereas when you're talking about it in terms of like, well, I might quit and I might not, and I don't know, and maybe this is a thing, and that there's a big difference between maybe and yeah, I'm fucking doing it right now.
That's a great point. Yeah, because if you don't care, they sure as hell aren't going to get cared. So
Yeah,
yeah, these are little things. Like you don't think about them. You think, as I said, you think about tech stack, you think of marketing strategy, you think about business plan, but it's sometimes just little things like, are you actually committed? Is this something you believe? Because
yep,
that will make a huge difference if you're successful or not. Doesn't guarantee, but it certainly makes it possible.
yep.
Before we get, well, we've gone a little bit over just because this is clearly a topic that you and I could talk about forever. But let's open it up for some questions. I think I already saw one that I wanted to get to. Daniel asked a really good question. One key advice for 2017, Dylan, although I'll pull it back because in
Yeah,
2017,
I
you
was
had
at
stopped
Alaska.
Sleuth. Yep. So I'm going to say 2014, Dylan. Like you're working on that sweet web page we saw. You're going through all those cool
Yeah.
pricing plans. You're like, this is going to be awesome. What's one
Yep.
thing you tell yourself?
Oh man. Um.
It could be positive. It doesn't have to be a lesson. Just like, what would you tell yourself?
Yeah, I think I'd tell myself just keep doing what you're doing, man. Like knowing what I know now about where it landed and how it all worked out, I think it was fine. Like at the time, I was probably feeling a sense of urgency, and like I needed to make a strong and heavy decision, which is probably how I beat myself up about most things. And like I probably just needed to do that in order to get to the place where I needed to get to, where I was upset when I had to shelve the thing and still interested over time and all that stuff. So, yeah, because I mean, I look back and I wonder, like what if I just like, you know, grabbed myself by the nutsack and said like, I'm just gonna do this, like back then or something, and like, would I have been like ahead of the curve or whatever? I think it probably would have been too early for Sleuth. I think it
Right.
would have been one of those things where even if it was like on target, probably would have been saying like, it feels like this thing is a little bit early. So 2017 Dylan or 2015 Dylan, whatever it was, like, yeah, stick at it.
Keep on keeping on.
Keep on keeping on.
Any other questions? Andy has one. Do you think you need to think about the money making strategy at all when going from a side project? I'm guessing when you say when you're not just at a side project, when you're starting to think about doing a startup, or you're saying when you're even thinking about side projects. I'm going to go with the latter one, where you have a side project, you're thinking this might be something. Should we be thinking about money making, or should you be thinking about finding customers, getting value, and the money will come
Mm.
later?
I mean, I think you need to consider it. Uh, Although there are very successful startups that are like open source projects that have like 10 or 20,000 stars on GitHub, and like there's definitely like there's a monetization path. Like if you have a huge audience, there's a monetization path from that audience to something, and you don't have to figure that out straight away. Like the fact that you have an audience is worth quite a bit. But I think you do need to focus on one of those things. You need to focus on some form of traction. Like, am I going to be able to sell this thing? Am I going to be able to sell it at a price point that makes sense at some point? Like, am I going to be able to generate volume, and I'm going to be able to turn volume into dollars at some point? One of those things has to hit. I mean, I can tell you, having gone through like the sort of seed stage VC stuff, and just looking at some other people's startups, when they have a product where they don't necessarily have mass appeal, and like they're maxing out at like $100 a month, right? Like you can just turn around and do the back of the napkin math on that. Like how much of that thing do you need to sell in order to get to $1 million in ARR? A lot, like a ridiculously large amount. And a million is not a lot, right?
And to
Like
be
that's kind of like
clear, $1 million ARR, that stands for annual recurring revenue, which means every year you're going to make at least this much.
Yep, that's right. And to get there with like $100 a month from individuals, like that's $1,200 a month, and like that's a lot. And then what is your growth past that? Nobody's interested in you like plateauing at a certain something. So I definitely think you have to have thought about like, hey, okay, if we're gonna go free and we're just gonna get a heap of people, like in the back of your head, like, is there a way that we could turn around? Can we platformize that? Can we something? Is it going to be enterprise thingies? You at least need to be able to articulate some path to money at some point to somebody, right? I don't think you need to let it gate you. But if you're like, oh, I think this is highly niche, and like we're going to have almost no users using it, like I'm going to turn around and sell it for $50 a month, and like that's going to be the max fee ever. Well, shit, maybe it's not the right thing for you to work on.
That's a good point. For example, one of my side projects is working on this game client for this text-based BBS game from late 80s, maybe up to 93 or 94. Super fun. There are approximately maybe a couple hundred people in the world that still play it, if that. So no matter how much I ever would charge, that just makes no sense. So I think focusing, you're right, don't focus on the money. Have it in mind just to help frame it. But if you're thinking about one thing, it's I need to find a need that people have that I feel like I can solve. And it's a big enough one. Either the people have a ton of money or there's so many of them, something like that. So I would
Yeah.
kind of think in that size. So kind of more of a market and the depth of need versus money, although money is a convenient proxy for that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Let's do one last question. What qualities did you have in mind when you invited people into the side project? Great to work with, just talent, friendship.
Yeah. It's like getting married. And I did have like I left this out of the story, but I did have a little flirtation with somebody that, we might have gone off and done this project together, and very quickly realized that that was the wrong person to do it with. And I probably knew that going in as well. But it was a good reminder that this is like getting married, and like you don't go on like one like internet swipey date and be like, hey, let's get married, right? And so for me, it was really about like, um, how can I interact with these people? Like, do I have a history with them? Like, I mean, Don and Michael, like, we didn't work directly together over the last 15 years, but we worked tangentially together and hung out together and had done enough things like where I'm like, look, I know these people. I know their bad sides and their good sides and like whatever. And I like respect them enough to be able to like, I think work together well. And then also just like skill sets too, right? Like, Don is a very different engineer than I am, but I think that together we are like Voltron, like because like we kind of approach things differently. So like even though we both bring engineering to the thing, we bring a very different side of that, which I think complements each other. And Michael, similarly, like has like a very strong product background and finance background, and like his skills, like he can do a bunch of stuff, and I have so much respect for these people that I can say, like, please God, you do this thing and own it, and I don't have to like worry about that. And there's just a million things to worry about in a startup, that being able to have truly partners that you can work with is invaluable. So I think that had a lot to do with it.
I think that's probably a good summary of this whole talk. It's just, again, it's fascinating to me. It's not about the tech. It's about the people. It's about working together. It's about passion. Very human things, which I think is sometimes
Mm-hmm.
forgotten.
I
That's all
mean,
the
they
time
said
we.
something. Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. No, you can wrap it up.
No, finish your thought.
Well, I mean, I think the stats about like founding teams is a lot like divorces, right? Like I think it's like something like 50%, like break up in a year.
Hmm.
And can you imagine like your first year of this thing's going to be stressful anyway, and now add to that like some sort of like internal fighting thing to the extent that you say like, hey, we can't do this thing together anymore.
Yeah.
Like, oof, like what are your chances of succeeding if that's your dynamic? So.
Yeah. That's definitely a point. It's always you look at like bands that break up and you're like, but you're doing so well, you're making all this money. Why would you ever do that? It's just because people working together, some do, some don't, and when they don't,
Yeah.
it makes everything worse. No matter money, believe it or not, can really override that.
Yeah.
So yes, find people, and even if you have a side project, feel free to invite someone into the side project. That might be a good way
Yeah.
to start feeling out future partnerships, help gauge actual interest versus professed interest, things like that. So
Pay Ringo a little less. That's okay. No.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean because Ringo's on here? So I was like, wait, what?
Oh
What's
no,
wrong?
I meant Ringo the Beatle. Sorry. No, it was a Beatles joke. Sorry.
Okay,
Didn't
that makes
necessarily
sense. I was
land.
like, man, what's wrong with Ringo? It's such a cool guy. Like,
Hey,
pay
he
that
kept
guy
the Beatles.
less.
Yeah. No, sorry, Ringo.
Yep,
I'm
just to be
just
clear, not talking about that. All right.
no.
Well, that's all the time we have today. I want to thank my guest, Dylan Etkin, for his openness and honesty, perspective, and advice. Thanks also to the Twitch chat for your questions and comments. If you're viewing this on YouTube, you can join our live studio audience, link in the description, or subscribe to get notified for future episodes. If you found this format interesting, please leave a comment below. If you have any suggestions on future topics, we'd love to hear from you as well. And as always, happy deploying. Do you want to ship code more frequently? Are deployments stressful events that you avoid? Well, Sleuth can help, and let me show you how. Sleuth is deployment mission control for shipping continuously. It helps developers coordinate and track the health and progress of deploys so that they have the trust they need to ship code faster. Modernizing a dev team is a tall order, but one that pays off in both productivity and developer happiness. Sleuth might be just what you need to pull it off. Actually, I think
What
I'm
about
supposed to not.
me? I need to get,
Oh, you? Oh, okay. Yeah, do your exercises.
all about the guest, dude. Come on, man.
Do your
You're the
mouth
interview. This
stretch.
is your job.
I like
You're
to do
pros.
mouth. Stretch your tongue. Do all the things.